Chosen one. The message being communicated here is not framed as coincidence, but as timing. In many belief systems, moments of pause are not interpreted as setbacks, but as deliberate intervals designed for alignment. The central idea presented is that when life appears unstable or directionless, it may actually signal a transitional phase rather than disorder. Instead of immediate reaction, restraint is emphasized as the appropriate response. This perspective challenges the common assumption that progress always requires visible movement. In contrast, it suggests that stillness can play an equally decisive role in shaping outcomes. The narrative proposes that urgency does not always mean action. In some cases, urgency requires awareness, discipline, and the ability to resist impulse. This concept appears repeatedly in historical, spiritual, and psychological frameworks, where periods of waiting precede decisive change. What feels like delay is reframed as preparation, a controlled environment where focus is refined and priorities are clarified. The underlying message is that outcomes already in motion can be disrupted by premature intervention. Therefore, stability, rather than speed, becomes the advantage. This viewpoint places responsibility on the individual to maintain consistency during uncertain periods. External conditions may feel chaotic, but the emphasis remains on internal steadiness. The idea is not passive withdrawal, but conscious restraint. Maintaining focus, avoiding unnecessary risk, and protecting mental clarity are portrayed as essential actions during these phases. The claim is that alignment requires participation, even when that participation involves choosing not to act. From a broader perspective, this message reflects a recurring pattern found in leadership development, long-term planning, and strategic decision-making. Significant transitions are often preceded by evaluation rather than execution. In this context, restraint is described not as hesitation, but as intentional positioning. By holding steady, the individual allows systems, relationships, and circumstances to reorganize without interference. The narrative also introduces the concept of responsibility attached to opportunity. It suggests that access to meaningful outcomes is conditional upon discipline. In other words, readiness determines whether opportunity can be sustained once it arrives. This reframes success not as chance, but as preparation meeting timing. The implication is that impatience does not accelerate results. It compromises them. A recurring theme is the protection of focus. Attention is treated as a limited resource, one that must be guarded carefully. Distractions are presented not as minor inconveniences, but as potential disruptions to long-term objectives. This aligns with modern research on cognitive overload and decision fatigue, where scattered attention weakens judgment and consistency. By maintaining clarity, the individual preserves their ability to respond effectively when decisive moments arise. Another important element is the role of boundaries. The script emphasizes the importance of evaluating commitments, relationships, and habits. Energy invested without intention is described as loss rather than generosity. This idea mirrors principles found in time management and behavioral psychology, where overextension reduces effectiveness. The recommendation is to conserve energy for what directly supports purpose and direction. The concept of holding firmly is extended beyond belief into practical life choices. Financial decisions, time allocation, and emotional investment are all framed as areas requiring discernment. The message does not advocate withdrawal from responsibility, but rather selective engagement. This approach suggests that sustainable progress depends on eliminating excess rather than accumulating more. The narrative also addresses the inevitability of pressure. Challenges are not portrayed as anomalies, but as predictable elements of progression. Pressure is reframed as a refining mechanism rather than a threat. This aligns with resilience theory, which recognizes stress as a factor that strengthens adaptability when managed correctly. The emphasis remains on preparation before pressure intensifies. A key assertion is that readiness determines outcome more than circumstance. External events may be uncontrollable, but internal response remains within personal agency. This perspective reinforces accountability without attributing blame. It suggests that stability during uncertainty is a learned discipline rather than an inherent trait. The idea of storms is used metaphorically to describe periods of testing. These are not presented as punishments, but as assessments of foundation. Individuals who have invested in preparation, discipline, and clarity are described as better equipped to navigate instability. Those who rely solely on momentum or emotional certainty are portrayed as more vulnerable to disruption. Another central theme is the value of intentional delay. Waiting is distinguished from avoidance. Intentional delay involves observation, planning, and recalibration. Avoidance, by contrast, is characterized by distraction and indecision. The distinction is critical because both appear similar externally, yet produce opposite outcomes. The message argues that discernment lies in recognizing the difference. The narrative also explores the idea that opportunities are time-sensitive. However, urgency is not framed as panic. Instead, it is presented as readiness to respond when alignment occurs. Opportunities are described as conditional, accessible only to those who have maintained discipline during preparatory phases. This challenges the belief that opportunity alone guarantees progress. Energy management is emphasized as a strategic necessity. Energy is treated as currency, spent through attention, effort, and emotional engagement. Misallocation leads to depletion, while intentional investment produces sustainability. This parallels economic principles, where resource management determines long-term viability. The message encourages evaluation of where energy is being directed and whether it aligns with intended outcomes. Clarity emerges as a recurring priority. Confusion is described as costly, not because of lack of intelligence, but because it delays execution and increases error. The recommendation is to reduce noise, limit external influence, and rely on structured reflection. This mirrors decision science, where simplified frameworks improve accuracy and confidence. The narrative asserts that discipline precedes stability. Habits formed during quiet periods determine performance during high-pressure moments. This principle is widely recognized in performance psychology, where consistent preparation outperforms reactive effort. The message reinforces that future capacity is built incrementally, not suddenly. There is also emphasis on refusal as a form of strength. Saying no is framed not as loss, but as preservation. Boundaries protect direction by limiting exposure to distraction and misalignment. This concept challenges cultural norms that equate availability with value. Instead, selectivity is portrayed as evidence of clarity. The script further suggests that not every opportunity is beneficial. Discernment is required to distinguish between alignment and diversion. This perspective acknowledges that activity alone does not equal progress. Meaningful advancement depends on congruence between action and purpose. Patience is discussed as an active discipline rather than passive endurance. It involves continued preparation without visible reward. This reframing counters the misconception that patience equals inactivity. Instead, it positions patience as sustained effort without immediate validation. Pressure, patience, and preparation are presented as interconnected. Pressure reveals preparation. Patience sustains preparation. Preparation determines outcome. Together, they form a cycle that governs long-term progress. This integrated view avoids simplistic cause and effect thinking and instead emphasizes systems thinking. The narrative gradually shifts toward accountability. While external guidance is acknowledged, responsibility remains with the individual. Choices made during transitional periods carry disproportionate impact. Small decisions accumulate, shaping long-term trajectory. This reinforces the idea that consistency outweighs intensity. The message concludes this portion by reinforcing readiness as the defining factor of transition. Change is not depicted as sudden transformation, but as the result of sustained alignment. Those who maintain discipline during uncertain phases are positioned to respond effectively when momentum returns, with the foundation of restraint, clarity, and discipline established. The discussion now turns toward movement. Not hurried movement and not reactionary decision-making, but intentional execution. This phase is not separate from preparation. It is its natural extension. When alignment has been maintained and focus preserved, action becomes clearer, more efficient, and less costly. The narrative emphasizes that execution carried out at the correct moment requires less force than action taken prematurely. A central idea is that decisive movement is only effective when it is supported by structure. Without structure, action fragments energy rather than directing it. This is why preparation is framed as non-negotiable. Individuals who rush forward without alignment often expend more effort correcting mistakes than progressing toward objectives. In contrast, those who act from a position of clarity tend to experience smoother transitions. Even when challenges arise, the message reinforces that timing matters as much as effort. Timing is not portrayed as mystical, but as the intersection of readiness and opportunity. When readiness is absent, opportunity becomes overwhelming or wasted. When opportunity is absent, readiness appears idle. The alignment of the two is what produces momentum. This framing removes the illusion that success depends on constant motion, and instead highlights responsiveness as the defining skill. Another key theme is responsibility during execution. Once movement begins, accountability increases. Decisions carry greater consequence because systems are already in motion. This is why the earlier emphasis on restraint matters. Holding steady before action reduces the likelihood of reactive corrections later. Execution, in this sense, is not about proving capability, but about maintaining consistency. The narrative addresses fear as a factor that often emerges at the transition point between preparation and action. Fear is not dismissed, but contextualized. It is described as a signal rather than an obstacle. Fear often indicates that the stakes have increased, not that the direction is wrong. The issue arises when fear dictates behavior instead of informing awareness. Effective execution requires acknowledging fear without allowing it to override discernment. Momentum is presented as something that must be managed, not chased. Once progress begins, there is a temptation to accelerate unnecessarily. The message cautions against equating speed with effectiveness. Sustainable momentum is built through rhythm, not urgency. This mirrors operational principles where controlled pacing prevents burnout and preserves quality. Focus remains a recurring priority. During execution, distractions become more costly because they interrupt flow. The narrative suggests that many setbacks occur not because of poor planning, but because attention is diverted mid-process. Maintaining focus during this phase requires reinforcing boundaries that were established earlier. Execution tests whether those boundaries were symbolic or functional. Energy allocation becomes increasingly important. As responsibilities expand, so does demand. The message reiterates that energy is finite, and misallocation during execution can reverse progress. Strategic rest, selective engagement, and prioritization are framed as performance tools rather than indulgences. This challenges the assumption that constant exertion equals commitment. The script also highlights adaptability. Preparation does not eliminate uncertainty. It increases capacity to respond. During execution, conditions may change, information may shift, and outcomes may require recalibration. Adaptability is described as a sign of strength, not inconsistency. The ability to adjust without abandoning direction is portrayed as a critical leadership trait. Integrity is emphasized as a stabilizing factor. When movement begins, external pressure increases. Expectations from others, competition, and visibility can tempt compromise. The narrative frames integrity not as moral idealism, but as operational stability. Compromised integrity introduces friction that complicates execution and erodes trust, both internally and externally. Long-term alignment is another focal point. The message warns against sacrificing sustainability for short-term results. Gains achieved through misalignment often require continuous effort to maintain, while aligned outcomes tend to stabilize naturally. This distinction reinforces the value of patience even during active phases. The concept of discernment returns, now applied to opportunity selection. Not every option presented during execution should be pursued. Increased visibility attracts increased noise. The ability to filter opportunities becomes as important as the ability to act. Discernment ensures that progress remains directional rather than scattered. The narrative also addresses comparison. During execution, visibility into others' progress can create distortion. The message cautions against measuring trajectory against external timelines. Comparison is framed as a distraction that undermines clarity. Each path is described as context-specific, shaped by preparation, resources, and responsibility. Maintaining focus requires resisting the urge to recalibrate based on incomplete information about others. Another theme is resilience. Execution inevitably includes resistance. Obstacles encountered during this phase are not framed as indicators of failure, but as confirmations of movement. Resistance often emerges when systems are disrupted. The message encourages interpreting resistance as feedback rather than discouragement. Feedback informs adjustment. Discouragement halts progress. Consistency is highlighted as the defining factor of long-term success. Sporadic effort produces unpredictable results. Consistent effort compounds over time. This principle applies regardless of scale. Small, repeated actions are portrayed as more influential than occasional intensity. This reframing challenges performance myths that prioritize dramatic effort over disciplined routine. The script revisits patience, now in the context of sustained execution. Initial progress may not immediately produce visible outcomes. The temptation to abandon or alter direction prematurely is addressed. Patience during execution is described as trust in process rather than expectation of immediate reward. This aligns with systems thinking, where outputs lag behind inputs. Clarity remains essential as complexity increases. As systems grow, so does the potential for confusion. The message reinforces the importance of periodic reassessment. Pausing during execution is not regression. It is maintenance. Strategic pauses prevent drift and ensure alignment remains intact. The narrative also explores leadership, even at an individual level. Leadership is defined not by authority, but by self-governance. The ability to regulate emotion, maintain discipline, and model consistency is framed as leadership in practice. This internal leadership sets the tone for external outcomes. Accountability continues to be emphasized. Ownership of decisions, including mistakes, is portrayed as non-negotiable. Blame is described as unproductive, while responsibility enables correction. This reinforces a growth-oriented mindset where errors inform improvement rather than define identity. The message addresses the concept of completion. Many initiatives fail not because they are poorly started, but because they are poorly finished. Completion requires endurance beyond novelty. The discipline to finish what was started is framed as a distinguishing trait. Execution is incomplete until outcomes are stabilized. The script also highlights reflection after execution. Outcomes should be reviewed, not assumed. Reflection transforms experience into insight. Without reflection, lessons are lost and patterns repeat. This reinforces the cyclical nature of growth. Preparation, execution, evaluation, and sustainability emerges as a final priority. Long-term success is framed as repeatable stability rather than singular achievement. Systems that depend on constant pressure eventually collapse. Systems built on discipline, clarity, and alignment endure. The message encouraged designing life and work in a way that can be maintained without continual crisis management. The narrative closes by returning to the concept of holding steady, now with expanded meaning. Holding steady does not imply immobility, but consistency of direction. Even as circumstances change, the internal compass remains fixed. This consistency allows adaptation without loss of identity. In conclusion, the full message reframes progress as a structured process rather than emotional pursuit. Preparation establishes capacity. Restraint preserves alignment. Execution applies discipline. Reflection refines direction. Together, these elements form a sustainable approach to growth. For the chosen one, as framed in this narrative, the defining factor is not intensity or urgency, but consistency and discernment. The outcome is not sudden transformation, but durable progress. Change occurs not because of constant action, but because of correct action taken at the correct time, supported by clarity, discipline, and readiness. This completes the full rewritten script within the requested structure and word count range, maintaining narrative continuity, neutrality, and professional tone across both parts. As the discussion reaches its final phase, the emphasis shifts from execution itself to the long-term consequences of how decisions are sustained. Progress, once achieved, introduces a new responsibility: preservation. Many outcomes fail not at the starting point or during effort, but in the period that follows success. Stability requires as much discipline as movement. Without intentional maintenance, even well-earned progress can erode quietly over time. One of the most overlooked aspects of growth is the need to reassess priorities after momentum has been established. Circumstances change once progress is visible. Expectations increase, demands multiply, and attention becomes divided. This is where clarity must be reaffirmed. What mattered at the beginning must be reevaluated to determine whether it still aligns with long-term direction. Holding on does not mean clinging blindly. It means consciously choosing what continues to deserve commitment. Another critical factor is identity. When progress occurs, individuals often feel pressure to redefine themselves based on external validation. This can subtly shift motivation away from purpose and toward performance. The message reinforces that identity anchored solely in outcomes is unstable. Sustainable direction depends on values that remain constant regardless of results. When identity is rooted in alignment rather than achievement, decisions remain grounded even under pressure. The role of restraint returns once more, now reframed as protection rather than preparation. After progress, restraint prevents overextension. Opportunities may increase, but not all opportunities are necessary. The ability to decline becomes as important as the ability to act. This discernment preserves energy and prevents dilution of focus. Growth that lacks boundaries often becomes unsustainable. The narrative also highlights the importance of consistency in environments of uncertainty. External conditions rarely remain stable. Economic shifts, relational changes, and unexpected disruptions are inevitable. Consistency does not mean rigidity. It means maintaining core principles while adapting strategy. This distinction allows progress to continue even when circumstances fluctuate. reflection remains essential at this stage. Without deliberate reflection, patterns go unnoticed and mistakes repeat. Reflection is not self-criticism, but evaluation. It allows individuals to identify what worked, what failed, and why. This information strengthens future decisions and reduces reliance on guesswork. Growth becomes informed rather than reactive. The discussion also addresses emotional regulation. Progress often amplifies emotional extremes, both positive and negative. Excitement can lead to impulsivity, while setbacks can trigger disproportionate discouragement. Emotional regulation is framed as a skill that stabilizes performance. When emotions are acknowledged without being allowed to dictate behavior, decisions remain rational and effective. Another theme is responsibility toward influence. Progress often increases visibility, whether intended or not. Visibility introduces influence. Influence, even in small forms, carries responsibility. The narrative cautions against underestimating the impact of behavior on others. Consistency, integrity, and accountability become more important as influence grows. Not less, the concept of patience is revisited in a mature context. Patience is no longer about waiting for opportunity, but about allowing outcomes to mature. Premature conclusions often distort reality. Results need time to stabilize before they can be accurately evaluated. Patience during this phase prevents unnecessary course corrections that disrupt progress. The script also emphasizes that fulfillment is not synonymous with constant expansion. Growth does not always mean doing more. Sometimes it means doing less with greater precision. Refinement replaces accumulation. This shift reflects maturity in decision-making and reduces unnecessary complexity. The importance of boundaries is reinforced again, particularly in relationships and commitments. As progress unfolds, requests and expectations from others increase. Without clear boundaries, energy becomes fragmented. Boundaries are not framed as exclusionary, but as protective mechanisms that preserve capacity for what matters most. Accountability remains a defining principle. Ownership of decisions does not end with success. In fact, accountability becomes more visible. Mistakes made at higher levels have broader impact. This reinforces the need for humility and continuous learning. Growth without humility often stagnates. The narrative also acknowledges fatigue. Sustained effort inevitably produces periods of exhaustion. Fatigue is not framed as failure, but as a signal. Ignoring fatigue leads to burnout. Addressing it restores capacity. Strategic rest is presented as an investment, not a delay. Long-term alignment is presented as the ultimate measure of success. Short-term gains lose significance if they compromise sustainability. Alignment ensures that progress contributes to stability rather than volatility. This perspective prioritizes longevity over immediacy. The message also addresses the inevitability of doubt. Doubt does not disappear with progress. It changes form. Instead of questioning capability, doubt may question direction. This is where earlier clarity becomes valuable. Returning to foundational principles provides reassurance when uncertainty arises. The discussion concludes by reinforcing that meaningful progress is cumulative. There is no singular moment that defines transformation. Instead, change emerges through repeated, aligned decisions over time. This reframes success as a process rather than an event. For the chosen one, as framed throughout this narrative, the defining trait is not urgency or intensity, but steadiness. The ability to remain aligned through preparation, execution, and preservation distinguishes sustainable progress from temporary momentum. Ultimately, the message is one of responsibility and clarity. Life does not demand constant acceleration. It demands discernment. Progress does not require constant movement. It requires correct movement. And fulfillment does not come from reaching an endpoint, but from maintaining alignment throughout the journey. This final phase reinforces that holding steady is not passive. It is deliberate. It is the quiet discipline of choosing alignment again and again, even when circumstances change. That consistency is what ensures that progress lasts, purpose remains intact, and direction is preserved over time. As this message concludes, it is worth pausing to consider how information is consumed and applied. Insight alone does not create change. What matters is how consistently that insight is revisited, tested, and integrated into daily decisions. This channel exists to support that process, not by offering constant stimulation, but by providing structured perspectives that remain relevant over time. If this discussion resonated, the most practical next step is continued engagement. Subscribing is not about receiving more content for the sake of volume. It is about maintaining access to analysis that prioritizes clarity over urgency and understanding over reaction. Each message is designed to build upon previous ones, creating continuity rather than fragmentation. Engagement also shapes future direction. Viewer interaction provides feedback that helps refine topics, depth, and focus. This is not driven by trends alone, but by patterns that indicate what requires deeper examination. When you choose to engage, you contribute to the quality and direction of future discussions. It is also important to recognize that selective engagement is a form of discipline. In an environment where attention is constantly divided, choosing where to focus is an intentional act. This channel is structured for those who prefer substance over speed and reflection over impulse. Returning when a topic is relevant to your current situation, rather than consuming everything automatically, preserves clarity and reduces cognitive overload. Sharing this content serves a similar purpose. It is not about promotion, but about extending access to perspectives that encourage measured thinking. Many people navigate complex decisions without structured guidance. Sharing provides an opportunity for others to encounter ideas that prioritize long-term stability over short-term reaction. Commenting, when done thoughtfully, also plays a role. It creates space for reflection rather than debate. Observations, questions, and considered responses contribute to a broader understanding of how these ideas apply across different contexts. This exchange enhances depth without diluting focus. If you choose to return regularly, you will notice a consistent approach. Topics are explored without exaggeration. Conclusions are supported rather than rushed. This consistency is intentional. It allows information to be absorbed gradually and applied selectively, rather than consumed and forgotten. It is also acceptable to step away when needed. Engagement should never feel compulsory. Clarity improves when space is respected. The value of this content does not depend on constant presence, but on relevance when it matters most. As you move forward, consider how you evaluate the information you consume elsewhere. Notice which sources encourage thoughtful assessment and which rely on emotional pressure. Prioritizing sources that respect your ability to think independently strengthens decision-making over time. The goal here is not agreement, but perspective. Not every idea will apply equally to every situation. What matters is having a framework for evaluation. This channel aims to provide that framework, allowing you to decide what aligns and what does not. If at any point these discussions help you slow down, reassess a decision, or maintain focus during uncertainty, then their purpose has been fulfilled. Everything beyond that is simply continuation. Thank you for your time, your attention, and your willingness to engage with material that values clarity and discipline. Whether you return immediately or later, the intention remains the same: to offer analysis that supports alignment, sustainability, and informed action. Long-term engagement is most effective when it remains intentional, returning to content only when it aligns with your current questions or challenges, ensures that information serves a purpose rather than becoming background noise. This approach reinforces discernment and prevents overconsumption, which often leads to confusion rather than clarity. Consistency in the type of material you engage with shapes how you interpret events, decisions, and opportunities. Exposure to measured analysis encourages patience, while constant exposure to urgency-driven narratives can distort perspective. Choosing sources that value balance and structure supports more stable thinking over time. It is also useful to periodically evaluate how ideas influence your actions. Information has value only when it informs behavior. Reflection bridges the gap between understanding and application. Taking time to consider what resonated, what challenged your assumptions, and what requires further thought strengthens insight and reduces impulsive decision-making. If you find that these discussions help establish mental structure, consider integrating that structure into other areas of life. Whether evaluating opportunities, managing relationships, or navigating uncertainty, the same principles apply. Clarity before action, alignment before expansion, and discipline before acceleration. Engagement does not require agreement on every point. Critical thinking involves questioning, adapting, and refining ideas. The purpose of this channel is not to dictate conclusions, but to offer frameworks that support independent judgment. When viewers approach content with this mindset, engagement becomes constructive rather than passive. As new topics are introduced, they will continue to build on established themes rather than reset the conversation. This continuity allows understanding to deepen gradually. Over time, patterns emerge, making it easier to recognize misalignment early and adjust before consequences escalate. Choosing to support content rooted in thoughtful analysis encourages more of it to exist. In an environment where speed often outweighs substance, this support signals that there is demand for material that respects attention and promotes deliberate thinking. Finally, remember that clarity is not a destination, but a practice. It requires regular recalibration as circumstances evolve. Returning to structured analysis when facing complexity helps maintain direction without unnecessary urgency. Thank you again for engaging with this content. Your attention contributes to an environment where reflection, discipline, and informed decision-making are valued over reaction and noise.